Betsy and Thomas here for the American Intelligence Media. Thomas, the other day I saw a meme that was actually a propaganda poster. And, propaganda can come in articles, but it can also come in images. And this one was very slick, and it regards what's going on in Hong Kong right now. Plus, I also noticed another article where Twitter is allowing the Chinese to put all their propaganda about the events in Hong Kong on Twitter. They're not being deplatformed. So there's a lot of confusion going on. And I know that you have a clear picture of what this is. I think our listeners need to know from you what is going on in Hong Kong.
Well, Betsy, if you don't have a historical perspective, you can't possibly understand it. And if you can't have a global perspective on what the British are doing, then you can't understand it. So let me explain.
Are you telling me the British are behind this? They're always behind the nefarious comings and goings in the world.
Well, let's remember that two foundations in England support the Syrian observation group and the humanitarian group, the White Helmets, which are actually now found to be nothing but propagandists, liars, and they murder people to do these set-up accusations of gas attacks by Bashir in Syria. So we were propagandized by the British to be pulled into the Syrian war, and they did it for a while. And of course, Obama just was ready to bomb anyone that could produce some more refugees because that's what he was about. But the point is that the British pulled us into Syria, didn't they? Now, they also, if you look closely, you have to ask, where do they get the engines for the missiles that are being launched in North Korea? North Korea does not have the capacity to do what they're doing. So where does that come from? That comes from the Ukraine. And why is the Ukraine providing that? Because the British are trying to destabilize, of course, the Ukraine because they can get in, as always, with their imperialism, just like America's doing. It's an open field on oligarchs in Ukraine. Now, what's happening in Iran? That is the British. Iran's sanctions put on them by Trump are doing a wonderful job to collapse the radical Islamic terrorist rulers of Iran and the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. Because Germany and Britain and France are working together through the EU, they went around the sanctions and actually made sure to give $400 million in yearly payments to Iran to keep up the deal, the nuclear deal. But let's remember, every time you make Iran mad, Trump does that regularly, they come out and say, la-di-da-di-da, we've been always purifying uranium much higher for weapons-grade fissile uranium, and it's in a mountain, and you can't bomb it, you can't see it, and we've never stopped. And they tell us this, and they show us this. We had the Israelis go in, and they found different places that this was still going on. So the British and the Germans, they're not our friend, and the French they're not our friends at all. And then you want to look, as I pointed out, what's going on in North Korea, what's going on in China. The Chinese breaking of the sanctions to North Korea, that's British. Now, when the Brits said that they were going to, give up Hong Kong and free it and no longer have a hold on it, and it would actually become a free zone, this was nothing more than a replication of the Chinese crooked Shanghai Economic Free Zone, which is a scam, which I've told you again and again. There's only a few gold bullion banks in the world, and one of the fakest is there in Shanghai. And if you are buying and selling gold and you're Chinese and you live in that zone, you get a 17% discount. Same thing in Hong Kong. Why do you think all of the richest people working in the Asian stock market, the Chinese, where the Chinese invest, all live in Hong Kong? They either live in Hong Kong, they don't live in Shanghai. Well, they could get a discount on all kinds of things if they lived in Shanghai. Shanghai is totally controlled by the Chinese. So Hong Kong has the appearance of some freedom. I know people who live there, and they work in fields of art and education and social service, and they have no problems. But they can tell you that it is completely a totalitarian, communist, controlled Chinese extension. And the minute we've told you everyone this from the beginning, when Hong Kong was to be freed, Hong Kong isn't going to be free. Hong Kong's going to be controlled by China. And if you think for 1 second you're going to be free in Hong Kong, look at the people who have become the richest off the stock market there, who were then murdered. And they don't even hide it. They just go and grab them and kill them.
Okay, but over the last few weeks, we've had the media send us image after image and videos of Hong Kong people with the American flags all over the place. Now, I believe that this is to arouse our patriotic sentiments so that we feel for the Hong Kong people. And we do. We feel for all people around the world that are struggling to relieve themselves of the Pilgrim Society, the Privy Council, and the British monarch. You know, we're in your court. But this one seems too staged. It seems like it's another Pearl Harbor 9/11 where they're trying to get the American people to be drawn into some kind of conflict. Feedback on that.
They can't have a color revolution using social media, which George Soros and the rogue CIA, including the British. And when I say rogue CIA, I also include the rogue Israeli CIA, the rogue British CIA. Why? Because they all work together. And once Arvinder Sambai, perfect example. Robert Mueller, perfect example. Once they've been in the, HSBC British banking, and where is it? In, Singapore, Shanghai, Hong Kong, London. Okay, so we're talking Comey and Mueller and Arvinder Sambai and Alison Saunders and all these people.
And didn't you say that Hillary Clinton has moved some of her operations over there?
She moved her crypto keys. What in trust was changed. Jerry Jones was changed. Was Jerry Jones, Jerry Brown?
Jerry C. Jones.
Jerry C. Jones was ahead of the company, and it eventually did move to Shanghai, and then it came back to America under all new auspices, under an all new name and everything. They keep changing these things, and this time they're trying to, Hillary's trying to move in and get the 5G contract, which she almost had when she had basically overwhelmed and taken over Broadcom, which was working out of Singapore. And Singapore is British. So anything that was ever British is still British, okay? The British don't give up nothing.
Well, why aren't they waving British flags calling for freedom?
This is a British false flag. Now, let me explain something. We just did a tape on the Uyghur people. And by the way, I have a correction to make.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Time out. Correction. I made a mistake. I said Dutch instead of Danes. And I also want to correct something else I said. This has to do with China. But it's not a correction, it's an addition. The Uyghur people, I said 1 million of them have been killed. No, it's way more than that. There's 25 million Uyghur people, and they're disappearing at a rate that no one can even keep track of. Entire villages gone. They take in a village for re-education, and only half of them come out. They don't even know where the other half are. And you're not allowed to make any reports of this. This is who China is. Now, if you think China is going to allow an economic zone like Hong Kong to be free, then you're insane. And if you think for a minute that the British let go of Hong Kong, you're also crazy. You just haven't followed history. The British don't let go of anything.
Well, actually, we have followed history, but apparently it's revisionist history, and it's provided to us in these public school indoctrination centers with history books that the publishers, who are, again, I want to point out the Pilgrim Society, because now we have a name for this evil cabal that's running the United States along with the Privy Council. And when you look at the list of Pilgrim Society members, you will see that many of them own the fake news, which is propaganda, and the publishers who print our history books, which is revisionist history. And it was so refreshing to see Trump the other day tweet out, finally, the words, these people, this is evil propaganda.
It's evil because they're trying to pull us into a war. So the British also tried to pull us into a war with Iran, with these supposed freighters, and it was their freighter, a British freighter, that started all of this. And then there was attacks on, supposed Iranian attacks on other freighters to pull in other nations, especially nations that were, friends of Brits. But they were attacked with things that the Iranian Revolutionary Guard didn't even have. So you could see by the holes that were bored by either a railgun or a laser into these freighters had no intention of sinking them or spilling the oil. This was just another false flag. Remember, they're involved in all the false flags from the Lithuania. How do you say it? The boat they sank, to get us into the war with Germany the second time. Lusitania. I miss a syllable in there. Mm-hmm. And so I want to say that the Uyghur people and what's going on there, it's much worse than I described. I was nice. I didn't get into the brutality that is actually going on. You're talking about sterilization of a people. You're talking about the eradication of what was an autonomous free zone that was literally, the Uyghur people. It's the Uyghur Autonomous Region, okay? It's basically referred to as East Turkestan. But every one of them is now going to become Chinese, exactly like they did to Tibet, except that they left a few Tibetans to be kind of a Walt Disney entertainment aspect of high-speed train visits to Lhasa in Tibet and a few other monasteries. Besides that, total pogrom. Nobody said a word, whether it's 9 or 20. It doesn't matter. 9 million Tibetans, let's call it, confirmed, dead. What did we do? We made China most favored nation trading status and brought them into the World Trade Organization. So what's happening in Hong Kong has nothing to do with America. We should have nothing to do with it. It has nothing to do with democracy, and it is being funded, as we just got through pointing out in the article, that was complete propaganda that was so filled with details and numbers of how we, America, supposedly through the National Endowment for Democracy and through a bunch of different George Soros non-government organizations, the same groups, they just changed their names, and they're doing it in all kinds of countries. And so what we're seeing is that group and the money that was spent on Hong Kong to set this up by the Brits and the rogue CIA and our Black Ops CIA and our FBI, make no mistake about it, this is exactly like Ukraine. $4.7 billion we spent for a regime overthrow in Ukraine. We're spending money behind the scenes through some of these organizations to do the same thing we always do. Social media fomenting of idiots on the street who believe what their iPhones tell them and their smartphones tell them. And they believe they're going to get freedom. I'm telling you, anyone who ever believed they were going to get freedom by living in Hong Kong is completely silly. Not going to happen, never will happen. Same thing with Shanghai, same thing with Singapore, same thing with any Islamic Muslim country, whether it be Saudi Arabia or the United Arab Emirates. No, you're not going to have any freedom. And so waving the flag of freedom, America, is just stupid, trying to pull us into another war. So Trump said, no, thank you to Syria war. He said, no, we're getting out of Afghanistan. He ended the war in Iraq. He refuses to go to war with North Korea. He refuses to go to war with Iran. He refuses to back up the squabbling going on in the Middle East that has spread all the way to Saudi Arabia and Yemen and all these, Somalia, all of them, Libya, all of them. He has refused war after war after war. And he's going to refuse the war with China because it is an economic war that he is winning. He's stomping them in the ground. And the reason China is coming out showing that they are the aggressive, totalitarian, communist pigs that they are is because President Xi is faltering. And they knew there was a chink in his armor. And so they are leveraging that to try to destabilize the Central Committee. Why? Because Hillary Clinton and James Breyer and Eric Schmidt and Mark of the Zuckerberg and all of them that went to China and opened up these little companies underneath Open Power Foundation, basically an IBM Eclipse 2.0, steal patents, create a fake, false scenario that you're giving away source code for free and everyone has to build onto it. That was Chinese attempt for a cyber warfare, one road, one belt. In other words, complete monopoly.
But Thomas, at this point in time, we keep banging away about this theft of social media and what happened with the IBM Eclipse Foundation, the Highlands Forum, and Leader Technologies. And I am thoroughly disgusted, absolutely disgusted with the independent media that they have not picked up this story and run with it. And I'm telling you, folks, if your researcher that you listen to, your media creator, is not talking about this story now, then they are a shill for the deep state. They are trying to keep you from knowing the truth. And I'm talking about all of them. I'm talking about Alex Jones. He's not talking about this. I'm talking about the Corbett Report, that propaganda site. I am talking about all of these people that are keeping you. Project Veritas is another one. If they were really doing their job, they would want to look under the hood and find out who is really to blame for all the social media stuff. For example, when they did their big expose on the bureaucrats in the deep state, they never once mentioned senior executive service. People, wake up. We are filled in the internet with shills, propagandists, and outright warmongers.
And they love China because the Council on Foreign Relations and Henry Kissinger, even Steve Bannon, went for China, 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 China. Hillary went for China. She moved her operations to the Shanghai Economic Free Zone. Now, this is complete nonsense. Since the time that Walmart became the largest corporation in the world, and Hillary is a paid member of the board for the Walton Family Corporation, that's all China, and that started in Arkansas. And so the IP theft, the intellectual property theft of America through patents, came with Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton, Rouse law firm, and they gave it to the Chinese. And the Chinese infiltrated 100%. They infiltrated everything. They were so close to having complete control of America that once they sterilized us all with 5G through Broadcom merging with Qualcomm, which Trump stopped at the last minute because of CFIUS concerns, which he's the only one who had those concerns. Everybody else was going to give America over to China. They had already hacked into everything. We predicted this would happen, that China would do the following, that they would attempt to crash us with U.S. bonds. We just printed $4.5 trillion worth of fiat money and bought those bonds back, and they didn't dent us. They tried to take us down by saying they'd have a gold-backed yuan or a renminbi, or any of their other currencies in any of their zones. And what did we find out? Well, we own anywhere from 93 to 98% of the currency of the world at any particular time. So for China to take over currency and to start buying oil in Chinese gold-backed dollars was a lie. And then we pointed out that the Shanghai Economic Free Zone and the Shanghai gold banking that goes on there was all a fraud. And they invented 7,000 tons of gold so that they could try to create a gold-backed yuan. It was found to be completely fraudulent. And then they tried to use that money, and they did use the money to leverage their way into the International Monetary Fund so that they could get a kickback through special drawing rights, which is a form of basically international currency. What happened is we allowed them to come in, and they bought up all the gold that they could that was surplus gold. And so the rogue CIA got to sell a lot of gold to China. They did increase their gold holdings, but not to the degree that they said. They wanted to have more gold than America so they could take over the currency of the world. Wrong. Trump trumped them in that too, and basically said, no, we're not going to accept you as a full member of the IMF. And then Trump trumped them in the World Trade Organization, another United Nations corrupt globalist takeover of all nations, because that's what that is. And then in the World Bank, no, they lost their status. So they lost it for the following. They lost it on bonds. They lost it on currency. They lost it on the IMF, the World Bank, the World Trade Organization, and now they're losing it on tariffs, which was the way they were completely draining the lifeblood out of America. And Trump has completely reversed that. And now what has happened? A lack of confidence in President Xi of China, who sits as the head of the president of the totalitarian communist committee that runs everything, and every company that has anything to do with China goes straight through that committee. there's going to be a lack of confidence in him. And so this is the attempt of the British, who are losing control of China to the technology of America, and they're not getting their fair share. So they need there to be a war between America and China. I don't mean a sanctions war, which Trump has already done. I don't mean any of the other wars, economic wars. I don't mean any of that. I mean a literal physical war. And Hong Kong is supposed to be the hot button for that to happen. Mr. Trump, President Trump, please make sure you ignore Hong Kong. That is a British problem. It has nothing to do with us. It was a lie that they ever made it free or gave it back to China. It was a lie that China, or for freedom, or that it was a lie that China ever let loose of it. This is a totalitarian communist government that doesn't care about human life. And Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton and Eric Schmidt have been completely taken over by Chinese communism. Don't forget that.